It has sure been a pleasure to be with you. For this session, we'll begin the beginning of this session looking at some things from a little more practical standpoint. We've looked at several biblical principles from Proverbs, from Ephesians, Hebrew, the book of Hebrews, all using the word train. And we've seen that the word train is the idea to narrow down, bring into perspective what must be done, but then also in that to keep out the things that should not be done. We see the idea of to obey and to train is to break wheel. In other words, we have to be able to reassure to our children that they are not the one driving the car. That God's given that responsibility to the parents, and that you won't relinquish it, and etc. There's no amount of discipline. There's no amount of discipline that will make up for a lack of training. And if we do offer punishment without training, we will provoke our children to wrath. And so it's so important for us to train our children, because it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, for us to carry out the other responsibilities that God would expect us to do as a parent, if we're not willing to first invest in their life and to train them. If any of you have ever trained an animal, a horse, a pet, a dog, a hunting dog, if you've ever trained anything like that, truthfully, on probably this topic that we're talking about right now, you have a huge advantage. Because you realize the importance in training is consistency. Also in training is much time invested for specific results. Do keep in mind that in training, it does not mean that the one that we're training, in this case it would be our children, it does not mean at the moment we're training them, they understand everything about why we're training them. Just like the master that has their dog and they tell their dog to sit and to stay. Truthfully, that dog doesn't know that they're told to sit and stay there because they don't want them out in the middle of the street so they'll get run over. The dog doesn't understand that. But you know what? You don't have to understand it to be trained. To be trained, you learn to submit to obedience. And that's what we must realize, is that the idea of training our children is not, well, I'm going to wait until they can fully understand everything, and then I will begin training them. Well, we'll be way behind the curve if we do it that way. I think about it as a kid. I already mentioned to you I grew up on a farm, and my grandfather, Shannon, was a tremendous mule trainer. And I can tell you stories that were just amazing of how under control he had his animals. And I'll just share this one quick one with you. He would be talking, if he was right now, he's not alive, but if he was, he could be talking to us right now in just a normal voice. And then, if he wanted to give his dog a command, he would drop his voice low when he talked to his dog would jump and do whatever he said. And it was amazing because the control that he had over his animals was twofold. They knew that he was authority, and they knew that his authority lied simply in the command. Not in all kind of yelling and scolding. It was just in the animal had been trained. And so the animal would respond. His mules would constantly turn their ears because they were constantly listening. Because they knew that he wasn't going to raise his voice at them. Instead, he's going to lower his voice and speak to them real gentle. But they always knew to obey. And so when we think about training, it's beautiful. Proper training makes it to where you can take your kids to a restaurant and enjoy the meal. Proper training makes it to where you can drive down the road all day long in a car on vacation and enjoy the trip. Proper training makes it so that you can invest in your children far beyond just, hey, can we act right? And when they're properly trained, then you have time to invest in spiritual opportunities that go far beyond just daily behavior. So what would that look like? Number one, I want to suggest to you, that one of the things, and this has already been implied, some of this has already been implied, but I just want to give you a list of practical things, because when I do these seminars, a lot of time people say, but like, how do you do, and they will, and sometimes we even do question and answers, and it gets real specific. So I just want to throw out to you things that I've been asked several times, or that we've dealt with, and things like this from a practical standpoint. Number one, if we're going to train our children, they have to know what the word no means. And that usually can begin at about 1 year of age. They can't understand why you're telling them no, but they can understand no. A child at 1 to 15 months old can quickly identify that if they're reaching for something and you say no, they can be trained to put their hand back. Now, you'll have to figure out what your consistent response is going to be. But your consistent response may be setting them in time out. It may be spatting their hand. But whatever it is, it has to be consistent. It is impossible to do training without consistency. And so, usually with babies, it doesn't take that many times. And then each day or two, they'll have to be reminded again. But again, it can be quick reminders. And then if you have a strong-willed child, it might take a little bit longer. But again, I want you to think about the very term, strong-willed child. In other words, a strong-willed child, by definition that we've been looking at, is the idea that it's just going to be harder to break their will. But are they going to have their will in your house, or are you going to have your will and God's will in the house? And that's where it comes down to who's going to drive the car. So no has to be one of those non-negotiables where you say, okay, in our house, we're going to say no, and we're going to be consistent. And we'll get to in just a few minutes about how many times we're going to say no. All right, the second thing, and I always, notice I step back, I didn't even think about it. I naturally step back when I make this point. I just figure one of these days, a mother or father is going to throw something at me when I say this, okay? But so I'm going to back up, and I'm going to hope I have time to dodge, and I'm not wanting to be offensive to anybody. But the second thing when we talk about training is I just want to remind you why children whine. There's only one reason why all children whine. If your child whines, it's because you have taught them to whine. That's the only reason children whine. And so the good news is, if you want to stop your child from whining, unless they're strong-natured, you probably could have most of it accomplished by the end of next week. But if they're strong-willed, you probably can have it accomplished at the end of 3 weeks, before this month is over with. And it's real simple. It is, you give them nothing they whine for. Nothing. If they were whining for their last breath, you kindly explain to them they won't get their last breath. They get nothing they whine for. And before long, if they don't stop pretty quickly, they begin to be punished for whining. So now not only do they get what they're whining, no, they not get what they're whining for, now they get punished for whining, and before long they realize, wow, that's crazy. I'm 6 years old, and for 6 years, that always got me what I wanted in this house. And now, all of a sudden, it just stopped completely. What's wrong with this scenario? I think about doing one of these seminars in Columbia, Tennessee, back about a year ago. And then after that, I went to a wedding, and it just so happened, I really didn't know these people very well, but it just so happened at the wedding, it was about a month to 6 weeks later, at the wedding, I just happened to be walking in at the same time. I really didn't know this family at all, and I held the door for them, and the lady stopped. And she looked down at her 6-year-old, and she said, hey, you know the guy that's made your life miserable for the last 6 weeks? And she said, that's him right there. And then she looked at me and she said, you wouldn't believe the difference in our house. And she said, I just want to thank you. She said, our house is totally a different place because now as parents we've taken control. We have the authority, and when we say no, it means no the first time, and when the child whines, they get nothing. And she said, I can't believe in this short time how our house is completely a different place. Listen, it's beautiful. It is beautiful. Children will eventually like it. They won't the first 6 weeks because they're used to driving the car. And it's kind of a big change when for 6 years you've told mom and dad what to do, and all of a sudden mom and dad won't take it anymore. And so now, hey, we're authority. We're the ones that tell you what to do. And it's not an issue of, hey, we don't love you anymore. Well, the truth is this issue of we really do love you. And so we want to do what's right and what's best for you. Okay, so how do you stop whining? Let me give you a little scenario of how it could look like. I'm not saying it looks like this for every child that whines, but here's kind of a scenario of how it oftentimes looks. Let's just make up the scenario here. It could be the father just as much as the mother, okay? But let me just make up the scenario. You've got a mom that's on the phone, and the reason it's got to be a mom because men can't multitask, okay? And so you got a mom that's on the phone, and she's come in, and she's cooking up some supper, and she's got some urgent something she's got to take care of on the phone. And so this little one comes around holding their sippy cup, all right? And this little one is like, Mom, I want juice. And the mother's like, shh, I'm on the phone, I'll get it. Mom, I want juice. I told you I'm on the phone, I'll get you juice in a minute. Oh, Mom! And so they lay down and they start whining, I want juice. And they're like, hey, hold on, I'll be right back. Give me that cup. I told you to wait till I get off the phone. I am sick of that. You have got to stop doing that. Now go drink your juice. Kid gets up. Got my juice. Gets on the phone. I don't know why he whines all the time. I don't know how we're ever going to get him out of this. He drives us crazy whining. It's real simple. We've already mentioned children can only learn in concrete measures. What they can see and touch and taste and feel is what they learn from. Listen, that child has been trained to whine. That child realizes when they ask for juice the first time without whining, if mom or dad are distracted, they won't get the juice. And if they whine while lying down on the floor, they always get the juice. The child doesn't mind having the parent raise their voice at them because that's become pretty normal. And so all the child knows is, if I really want juice right now, I've got to lay down on the floor and I've got to whine and I'll get the juice and I'll get my way. And so, for a few weeks, you may have to say, hey, I'm going to have to call you back later. And then whatever your punishment is going to be is consistent. The child knows it. The child knows ahead of time what the punishment is. They know that they never get it. If they're whining for supper, they don't get it. They don't get what they whine for. And so then they realize, okay, here's the punishment that you get instead of what you were asking for. And really, and I know there's always exceptions. Trust me, we raised one exception. But the rule of thumb is, it doesn't take that long to stop children from whining. It just takes consistency. They never, ever, ever get what they whine for. A third thing, and I've already mentioned this one, but I want to mention it one more time for emphasis' sake, because this is huge. And that is, training must involve training to obey. Again, we have to realize our children do not have the ability of intellect to reason and understand authority and submission. They can't understand. You give a command and it must be obeyed. The only way they can learn all of that is over time. They learn it because they are trained to obey. And so as we spent a lot of time in the first session talking about obedience, as we bring this to a conclusion today, what I want you to understand is, young children, you can't just sit down with just the Bible alone and say, I want to teach you what obedience is. And a little 3-year-old say, Mommy, thank you so much for teaching me about obedience. So how are you going to train a child to obey? Well, it's just, or how are you going to get a child to obey? It's just that they have to be trained to obey. And so with this training, what we have to realize is that there has to be positive instructions, negative. Some of this is a review. Positive instructions, negative instructions. Negative instructions always follows consequence. Consequence always consistent. It's always consistent. When you're in the best of mood and you're thinking, oh, they just did that, and that involves a timeout with me talking with them at the end of the timeout, and I was having such a good day. I don't want to go through that. You got to go through it. It's got to be like, hey, okay, you know that you weren't supposed to have the juice on the couch, whatever your rule is. By the way, can I insert something else right here out of left field? When you become very consistent, maybe you already are. I just want to give you something to think about. If you are going to be really, really consistent, which we need to be, we probably also ought to have few rules. Because think about it. Every rule you have has to have a consequence. Every consequence has to be enforced immediately. And so what would be a lot better is to have principles that must be kept in the house. And then with those principles have some rules, but then with those rules they have to be obeyed every time. And that's just something to think about. But parents that just quickly bark out things, parents that just, and again, if it's that important to you, I'm not saying that it shouldn't be this way, but I'm just saying, for example, some parents without even thinking will say, we don't drink in the living room. Okay, you ready to live and die by that? Because if you say that, that's a rule. And then you have to also be able to say, now, what's the consequence? If you drink in the living room, what's the consequence? And then the next time they're drinking in the living room, you have to stop and enforce it. And if not, you don't need to make it a rule. And so, and again, I'm not saying that to say now, don't give your children any rules. I'm just saying be wise. Because what is far more important is that they learn obedience instead of your carpet has no stains on it. Which is more important. And so choose your rules carefully and make sure that ultimately you're raising your child to lead, not you're simply trying to keep a clean floor in the living room. And I think you know what I mean by that. I hope you do. But within that training to obey, please, I want to go back to that other one because this is a huge one. And that is realize that every time you give a warning, you are encouraging disobedience. The wildlife associations in each state, they will set a limit of how many fish can be caught in certain lakes or rivers, etc. Now, when they set a limit and say you can only catch 5, are they encouraging you not to fish? No. They're saying a limit of 5, encouraging you to fish, but at the end of catching your 5th fish, you have to stop fishing. Do you realize that if you drive through a town where it is a known fact that you can drive 10 miles per hour over the speed limit, what do people generally do? If you drive through a town where it is known there is no tolerance. I took a picture just yesterday. Some of you, we were talking at breakfast about an antique store we were in. And there was, as you entered the antique store, there was 2 pieces of paper with a sign, one sign on 2 pieces of paper taped up. And it said, children are absolutely to not touch any antique. And then the next piece of paper underneath it said, absolutely no tolerance. Now, how many warnings do you think you're going to get there? Well, you'd expect to get no warnings. In other words, you would expect what? Obedience. That needs to be the policy in our homes. And our homes needs to be, look, because really it ends up being 4 or 5 warnings. Because people that get in the habit of it, the way they'll typically do it is they'll call first the name. Johnny! And that's to say, you're doing something I don't want you to do. But Johnny ignores it because he's been taught that he doesn't have to do anything until the countdown comes. And so then it's the second time. Johnny, I thought we talked about this. You can't do that at a friend's house. That's embarrassing. Stop. They say they don't have to stop because they learn they don't have to stop until they hit 3. Johnny, right now. Johnny, now we're up to 4 warnings. Johnny, 1, he continues to do it. 2, he continues to do it. Finally, we're on the 7th or 8th warning now. When he hears 3, he stops doing it. Isn't that amazing? He couldn't stop on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th time that he was told, but he can stop on the 8th time. Why? Because he has been taught. You can disobey here, 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 and here. But when you hear the word 3, now you have to start obeying. See, it's training. What if you trained your child? Look, you're going to have to start obeying on the 1st time. And wow, is it hard. Any of you that are parents right now, you know from first-hand experience, it is hard. I remember at times Tracy and I, we'd do good at this for a little while, and then we would find ourselves, telling the kids something 2 or 3 times. And, and then we would talk with each other. We'd be like, we're back to that thing of telling them multiple times. And so then we'd have a quick family powwow. And of course, you got to know your kids. And so, I mean, your kids got to know you. So if your kids don't know you like this, they misunderstand it. You shouldn't use language like this. But our kids understood me. And what I'd say to them was like, hey, as parents, we've made some mistakes lately. First, I want to tell you we're sorry because we have allowed you to disobey. And we have warned you several times, which has taught you again that you can disobey several times. And so just want you to know that today we're telling you we're sorry and we expect you to do the right thing, and it begins with the first time we ask you. And so I know it's going to be a little bit hard for you to break that habit because we've been not doing our job as parents for a few weeks and a few months, and so we're, just know that. And so what you might want to be aware of the fact is that I'm going to hammer you over the next few days, and your life's going to be miserable. But then, after a few days after that, we're all back in line again, and it's going to be really better after that. Well, they got the idea. And so for the next few days, it was like, that's it. Go to your room. You had your one command. You didn't obey. Go. Oh, I forgot about that. Okay, they go. Next time when they come back out, ooh, I got to remember to obey the first time. And then after just a few days of that, the rule of thumb, there are always exceptions, but the rule of thumb was everybody's kind of back in line. Who's the boss? Who obeys? What's obedience look like? How many times do you get told to obey? You only get told once. Our middle child, she was very, very strong-willed. And, she was the one, you'd take her out every service for 4 years and just wear her out, and she would still act up, And so, I just urge you, if you got that strong-willed child, don't give up because it's still a battle of wills. Who's going to win? And you just got to prove that you got a stronger will than they have. And I remember one time we were at a restaurant. You know how sometimes you go out with your friends, and I don't know if it's like this for you, but a lot of times the parents huddle at one end because they want to get rid of the kids, and the kids huddle at the other end of the table. And so I remember looking down the table at my daughter, my oldest daughter, strong-willed one, and she was about to throw a roll or something. She was doing something she wasn't supposed to be doing. And our eyes caught, and I looked at her and I went, she looked me right in the eye. She threw it. And I looked at her, and she kind of backed off then. And so when we got in the car, I said, hey, we need to have a talk about what happened. She said, what? And I said, I told you no, and you kept on. And she said, you didn't say a word. I said, you didn't see the look I gave you that told you to stop? And she said, but you didn't open your mouth. I said, you would do well to learn how to read looks because you're going to get in trouble just the same. You see, it was a play of will. She was going to prove that day that she could have her will over my will. And for me, it wasn't an arrogant thing. It wasn't, no, my will. It was a parenting thing. God gives us the responsibility to be the parent. And it's our responsibility to have our children submit. And again, I don't believe in a long list of rules. We talked about principles last night. Remember, one of the principles we talked about was respect. And part of that respect is you respect your parents. We didn't have long rules about it. It just boiled down to this. You will respect us as parents. You won't always agree with us, but you won't roll your eyes. You won't talk back. And any time you want to talk about something we've asked you to do, now you listen to parents, you obey first, then we'll talk. But it's disrespectful to talk first and then decide if you're going to obey. See, it's a disrespect issue. And so anything you want to talk about, you obey us first. And after you've obeyed us, then you can come and talk to us. And we'll sit down and we'll talk it out. We'll look in Scripture. We'll pray about it. We'll do whatever we need to do to make sure that the right thing is being done. But you'll obey first. And so we see the need to teach them no. We see the need to not teach them to whine. We see the need to train them to obey. The fourth thing that I would mention to you is train them to work. We mentioned last night the importance, or earlier today, the importance of teaching a child to work. The Lord said, if anyone would not work, neither should they eat. I'm telling you, and I'm not being sarcastic, I'm just telling you, I believe the Word of God in that. I believe that no one should be working, that should be eating, that will not work. And so, they sell brooms. that are this tall with little dustpans. And it's a beautiful sight to see a 3-year-old sweeping the floor underneath the table after every meal. Well, why would I do that? They won't do a good job sweeping. You're not trying to keep a clean floor. You're teaching your child responsibility. When everybody gets up from the table, everybody has a task. And each of your children have a task that they have to do. Mom and Dad have a task they do. Why? Because everybody's in this family together. And it's not going to be just Mom that does all the work around here, or just Dad that does all the work around here. We all live in this house. We're going to do it together. We're going to mow the yard together. We're going to keep the house clean together. We're going, and all of these things, again, it's all about, if you don't work, neither do you eat. And the beauty of that is, then not only is work ethic learned, but also then responsibility is learned. Now, if you want to couple with it the idea of training, another one that's very important that goes right along with this is training financial responsibility. When should a child learn how to save? When should a child learn how difficult it is to make money? You know, the opposite of easy come, easy go. When are they going to learn that it doesn't come easy? So therefore, maybe I shouldn't let it go easy. Well, I think they need to start learning it at a very young age. And by the way, at a young age, they need to start learning how you give back to God. I think about my dad. My children were blessed with very good grandparents. And my dad came to my kids when they were young. He said, I'm going to give y'all a calf every year. And when the calf sells, I'm going to split the money. So the first year that calf sold, he come to the house and he had stacks of $1 bills. And he gave to each of the kids a $100 bill. 100 ones. And he said, now I want you to sit down and I want you to count out those stacks of $1 bills in stacks of 10. The kids put them all out in 10. And each kid across the living room floor had their stack. And Dad said, now what I like to do is I like to give 10% of what I make to God. So on Sunday, how much would you give to God out of your stack right now? Well, our oldest, our son, he immediately picked up one stack. He said, that's what I give to God. And then our little one was hardly too young to understand, so she does what her brother does. Remember the strong will one I told you about? She looked at it, she picked up $1. And Dad said, well, you're only going to give God $1 out of 100? She said, yeah. And he said, well, maybe we need to reconsider that. And Dad picked up a stack of the 10 and handed it to her and said, why don't you keep that and we'll give the other 90 to God? She said, no, 10's good. We'll give 10 to God. And real quick, she learned that you're going to give to God. Because why? Does she understand all of that at like 4 or 5 years of age? Does she? No. What was my father? What was her grandfather doing at that moment? He was training. She had no way to understand the fullness of it. Just look how generous God is to you. But she's starting to learn because she's being trained. And so every year, my dad, their grandfather, would have that talk with her. And in between, every time they made money, we would have that talk every Saturday. How much money have you made this week? Well, how much of that would you give back to God? All right, let's give that much to God. All of that, remember we talked about 100% is on the parent. When they get ready to leave, we want 100% of it to be on them and a little bit of percent to be on us. Listen, don't send your kid off to college. Don't send them off into the world and them have not learned how to give generously to God. Don't send them off and them not have learned how to make money. Don't send them off and them not have learned how to save money, how to spend money. And again, with every kid, it's different. And for some of our kids, it's so easy that if we're not careful, we start patting ourselves on the back. Look at a great parent I am. And then with other kids, we realize they're just different. And because of the way they're different, their mind doesn't operate like that. And it's difficult. My 2 oldest kids, it was so easy for them to learn to manage their money. They learned how to make it. They learned how to save it. They learned how to spend it. And I'm telling you this, how easy it is to get to thinking, oh, you're all that. I don't know if Tracy and I have ever bought a tank of gas for our son, ever. He paid his insurance. He paid his gas. He paid, and you're thinking, wow, I'm doing really good. Then his younger sister comes along. We paid very little of her things. She paid her way. Then the youngest sister came along. And, we got our eyes on that when she's 18 years old. Is she going to be ready to leave? And she was probably 16 years old, and we're sitting in a subway one day. And I'm thinking, this is a good opportunity to try to teach her a little more. And so I just said to her, we're sitting in a subway, and I said, hey, have you noticed how every Subway or, fast food, whatever, have you noticed how you always order the most expensive thing on the menu? I just want to get that dialogue to see what she's thinking. I said, have you noticed you do that? Get it? She's 16 years old. I glance up at the menu and say that. She doesn't glance. She looks at me, she says, nice try, Dad. And I said, I don't get it. What do you mean, nice try? She said, I know what you're trying to do. I said, no, I'm just trying to open up dialogue here. You always order the most expensive. Nice try, Dad. And I'm like, I'm lost. I don't have a clue what she means. I said, I don't get it. What do you mean, nice try? She said, I know that every sandwich costs the same, and you're just trying to trick me so you can laugh. And I realized she's serious. She's 16 years old. She's gone to Subway, no telling how many times in her life. She even buys her own sandwiches half the time. And I'm like, you really believe every sandwich here costs the same? She said, you're trying to trick me again. I said, look at the menu. Just look up there. She's eating her sandwich. She starts looking. And she just kept studying. She said, I had no idea they cost different amounts. And I said, we only have 2 more years to get you ready to leave. And I said, we still have a long way to go, don't we? She said, I guess we do. I got a lot to learn. Listen, every child is different. And the things that one learns so easily, the other one doesn't learn. But it still doesn't relieve us so that we say, I don't have to worry about training them in that. They don't get it. No, that's when we do have to train them. And even more intensity. So how do we train them to work and how we train them to manage their money? Let me mention this, and you figure it out for you, but I'll tell you 2 things that are, like, in my opinion, are non-fatal. They will work. Don't ever buy your child a cell phone and pay for the phone or the service. Don't ever do that. And if your child loves expensive tennis shoes, don't ever buy their expensive tennis shoes. And don't ever buy your child's gas. And your child will always want to work. They will always want to work. Because what they will not do without is they will not do without gas money, they will not do without cell phone, and they will not do without their nice shoes. And so as long as you keep those their responsibility, they're going to make sure they get out and find a job. They're going to make sure they don't spend all their money. Because it's this simple. Yeah, you're welcome to be on my cell phone plan, but on my plan, yours costs $30 plus tax every month. So as long as you got that, it's fine. But the day you don't pay your bill, I'll have to turn it off until you pay your bill again. And they get it. Because hopefully, by that age, they've already learned responsibility. The idea that, yeah, I am responsible for my actions. And in that is the very idea that, hey, I love you, but I love you enough to not rescue you. And so when you don't take your responsibility seriously, and you expect me to rush in and just rescue you and not let you, which, by the way, there's a proverb that teaches this, that if you rescue a fool, you'll only have to do it again. So, the idea of, hey, you get in trouble and you're at the principal's office, I'll come down and take up for you. No, you're in trouble and you're at the principal's office. If I need to come down, I'll come down. But just know I'll be on the side of authority. I'm not going to rescue you from what you do wrong. I will love you, and I'll sit beside you, and we will take the consequences together, and I will help you go through that time of bearing your consequences. I'm not going to stop loving you. I'm not going to abandon you, but I will not rescue you from your decisions. So you want to go out and spend your money this weekend and not have cell phone money? That's fine. You don't have to have a cell phone next week. That's your decision. Next paycheck, you can get it. You can pay your cell phone. It's fine. And it's amazing how that worked. It's amazing how all of a sudden kids become hard workers. Kids become very wise with their money because, and by the way, isn't it beautiful? Isn't it beautiful that in that scenario, if we do have to rescue them to some degree, the most we're probably rescuing them is what, $30 or $40? But then once they learn to do that, at least they're not calling when they're 22 and 23 and 24 and saying, hey, we bought more, just fill in the blank, than what we can afford. You and Mom wouldn't mind paying $2,000 this month, would you? Well, see, that's not an option. Because that's been handled way back here when they were 12 and 13, 14 years old. And so then when they're 22, 23, they're not going to be tempted to bite off more than they can chew. Because they handled that back here when they were 13, 14. And they realized that's not a very good way to live. And so that really helps in the future of getting those mistakes out of the way while they're young. All right, we got to move on and close. Number 5 is they need to be trained to come when you call. How many times you call your child to supper? How many times you call them to get up in the morning? If it's more than once, you just got to stop and ask yourself why. Are they hard of hearing? Or are they simply knowing that they don't have to come until? They don't have to come until you sound angry. They don't have to come until what? You've trained them, so you ought to know what that answer is. And then what if you say, okay, I'm going to train them differently now. I trained them to not come the first 5 times I called them. What about if it's this simple? Hey, you know how I call you for supper and it usually takes about 5 times because you want to finish your video game? Yeah? I tell you what, I just want you to know, I'll call you 1 time for supper. If you don't come by the time the family sits down and ready for prayer, the video game goes in the closet for a month. He's not going to believe it. So the next night you're going to call him supper because you've never done this before. What's he going to do? He's not going to come the first time. So what do? You take the video game and you put it up for a month. His mind's going to be blown. And then the next time he says, wow, they're serious about this. I guess I've got to learn a new way here. We're changing the things up in this house. We've gone back to the obey the first time that you call. Same thing getting up in the mornings. We train our children that you can keep sleeping, you can keep sleeping. What if that's not an option? Well, they'll miss school. Okay. What happens when they miss school? They get in trouble. Oh. Okay, so now they've got to start bearing their own responsibility. What happens when they don't get a ride? I don't know, they missed the bus. You're going to take them? Why? They didn't get up when you called. Why would you keep taking them if they didn't get up when you called? And so we just look at this and say, we can either spend our life rescuing them every time they disobey, or we could raise children that are trained. And what a difference. It's not, how much does it wear you out to have to fight your kid every morning to get up? And then to think, what if we don't have to fight our kid every morning? What a difference that is. And then also train where to sleep. Sometimes kids have a bad habit of getting up out of bed and going and crawling up in your bed, and you don't sleep very well and all that. And I guess if you want your child to sleep there, it's fine, but a lot of parents don't want their children to sleep there, but then they'll say, well, we can't make them stop. Whoa. Remember, you're the parent. You can train your child. And I think about Tracy when we had her first, and second was on the way, so we put him out of a baby bed when he was probably 15 months old, and we put him in a little bed. And this little bed he could get out of. And so every night he would get out and come to our bed. And so we talked about it and said, well, we just need to make him stay in there. And Tracy said, how are we going to do that? I said, we'll just shut his door. She said, well, he'll stand there and cry. I said, I know, but if we don't open it, he'll either stand there and cry and go back to his bed, or he'll lay down on the floor, but after a few nights, he won't keep doing it. Oh. Protected mothers. I was the worst guy in the world. She's like, we are not going to let him stand at that door and cry. I said, he'll just sleep in the floor. Or either he will in his bed, but the thing is, he won't do that after a few nights, and he'll stay in his bed forever, and we won't have to deal with it anymore. Oh, I can't believe it. She had a pediatrician she just loved. He hung the moon, She said, well, I'm going with the pediatrician next week. I'm going to ask him. I said, ask him. She came back. I said, hey, by the way, what did the pediatrician? I don't want to talk about it. I said, no. Tell me what he said. He said that he wouldn't stand and cry at the door more than 3 nights. I said, yeah, almost anything with young children. And I know the strong-willed children are exceptions, so I know there's exceptions. But the normal things with children can be broken in 3 days. The normal things can be broken in 3 days. And so, it doesn't take a child long to realize, I don't want to sleep in the floor here. Mom and Dad's told me they're not coming back in here. They told me I'm sleeping in my bed. It's that simple. They're the boss. It's their house. It's an honor for you to live in this house with us. That principle is from Luke 15. If you don't want our will to be done, you have to go out and live in a place where your will can be done. Luke 15. But if you decide you want to live in a place where our will is done, we would love to have you in this house. And so that's the beauty of what God is calling us to do. He's calling us to become as, now keep in mind, all of that is with the emphasis on the trainer. That's what the trainers do. And the beauty is, when we do that, the children become trained. All right, let's close and extend the invitation with, to me, on this topic, one of the most beautiful verses in the Bible. When you turn to 3 John, we close with 3 John. But this time, John, who in his young life was called a son of thunder, he wanted to call fire down and destroy people. And now by the time he writes 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, he's an old apostle. And he loves the church as if it's his own children. And he talks to them like they're children. And, I've told Tracy for a little while now, and I hope we can get this done soon. You know how people are putting little verses and proverbs up on their walls now in homes. I want this on the wall at our home. And I'd really love for this to be on my tombstone one day. 3 John, verse 4. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. What greater joy to know that in the one thing that is the most important thing for our children, the one thing that's the most important thing they're doing. I have no greater joy than to know that my children walk in truth. And I know that children reach an accountable age and they can decide not to walk in truth. That's one of the reasons why it's such a great joy when they decide to walk in truth. I know it's a great responsibility that God gives us as parents to give them that foundation and start them on the way. And the truth is, it's not easy. Because there's a lot of distractions, and if we're not careful, we get to thinking football is more important than Bible class. If we're not important, we get to thinking that straight A's are more important than being there on Wednesday night. And we're not important, we get distracted by all these things, and we forget to narrow, train. We forget to narrow and say, this other stuff can have its benefits. But what if my child gained the whole world and lost their own soul? What would I give in exchange for their soul? I want to invest my life and my heart and all of my training and all of my instruction to help my children walk in truth. I want my children to love submissiveness. I want them to love the concept that, if you find the right authority and submit to it, your life is safe. Your life is secure. Your life is blessed. And I want, as they grow older and they understand the idea of submitting to God, I want that to be natural to them because they've had parents that loved them and held them responsible and was a blessing to them, so that they'll realize that God loves them and will hold them responsible and yet be a blessing to them. And so surely we all could agree we have no greater joy than to know that our children walk in truth. Think about, those words are written in God's holy word. What does God really want for you and I? What He really wants from you and I is He wants us to walk in truth. He wants us to be His children that walk in truth. And so before we leave today, we'll sing a song of encouragement. And if anybody needs to turn their life closer to walking in truth, won't you come as we stand and as we sing.